Hi there. Welcome to Fireside with Peter Adkison on Gen Con TV. On this show, we go in search of the untold stories behind your favorite games. And this season, what else? Dungeons and Dragons. Our guest today is Bill Slavicsek. Bill, he has worked on some of the biggest games in RPG history. Star Wars, Torg, various D20 titles, the Eberron campaign setting, and of course, Dungeons and Dragons. He's now the lead writer for Elder Scrolls Online MMO. Bill, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So, how you doing? How are you surviving the pandemic?
Like everybody else, working for a tech company is pretty good since they were able to set us up to work from home. Like the first week we were up and running, and so I'm keeping busy just doing my normal work day just from my dining room table. Otherwise, nice. It's good to have both me and my wife and my cat in the same building. I know a lot of people are, out there by themselves, which has got to be terrible. So, we're hanging in there. Can't complain.
Good. Well, so the show today, it's about you. It's a chance to review the history of Bill Slavicsek. We're primarily interested in D&D or TSR properties, but we want to get to know early life. Where were you raised? How did you get into this crazy business of games?
I grew up in New York City, born and bred. Born in Brooklyn, raised in Queens, went to school in Manhattan. I grew up as a gamer and a comic book fan and a reader of science fiction and horror and fantasy.
Nice.
Originally I was going to I wanted to be a comic book artist. I went to the High School of Art and Design in Manhattan, one of the schools in the New York City school group where you had to take a test to get in, and portfolio, all that kind of stuff. I did that, majored in cartooning and animation, and then decided when I looked at colleges that art was hard. All you did all day was sit and draw. And luckily along the way...
It seems like the life, right?
Yeah.
It seems like the life to sit and draw all day.
Oh, no, it's tougher than you think. Luckily along the way, I figured out that I was actually a pretty decent writer. And it came a lot more naturally and easy to me to get to the same level of quality I would have wanted in my art. Would have taken a lot more work. And, for as much as I do, I am relatively a lazy person. So,
I hear you. We have that in common. I've always thought of myself as kind of lazy. Like it takes deadlines and pressure, like peer pressure. Like I have pride, And so if I have deadlines and I have friends who know about it, then I'll buckle down. But if I'm drifting off by myself, it's hard to, stay motivated.
So I went to college to be a journalist with the intention of just being a writer of some sort. And then, and I grew up, I was there when D&D came out, and I found it in a store called Polk's Hobby. Found one of the books in one of the little blue boxes, and my weekly gaming group who played Risk and Broadside and Dogfight and Cosmic Encounter, suddenly we found D&D, and that was I was the game master, the dungeon master, because I was the one that read all the rules for all the other games, so I would figure out how to do them. So I did it for D&D, and never knew that was going to be a career. That was just something I loved to do. And then I answered an ad for a blind ad in the New York Times for a game editor. It turned out to be West End Games in Manhattan, and they hired me, and I've been doing that ever since.
About what year was this? Like, when did you just find D&D, and when did you go to West End Games?
I found D&D, it had to be 76, 77. I have a clear and vivid memory of the summer of Star Wars, which was 77, playing D&D going to see Star Wars as many times as I possibly could, and reading the Sword of Shannara. Those were like the formative things that summer for me. But I got my job with West End Games in January of 1986. I started. And that seemed to be when I started most of my jobs, January of the various years. But I went to work for West End, and who I had actually never heard of prior to working for them. They were well known in a very small circle at that time. They had done some board games like Killer Angels and Junta, were their big claims to fame at the point when I joined the company. They were just beginning to get into role playing. They had published Paranoia, and they were about to publish the Ghostbusters game when I got there. And Ghostbusters was the first D6 game. And it was, I always saw it as the audition for how we got the Star Wars game, but that's apocryphal because I was not in the know. I just happened to work there.
So what were you hired to do there? What did you do?
Originally, I was hired to be an editor, game editor, and typesetter. This is when you still had big typesetting machines, and
Wow.
you had to do your own type and roll out galleys and use waxers to put them on boards and all that kind of stuff. But I did that in college at the newspaper, so I knew how to do that. So,
right.
But it wasn't long before I was also doing development, and before the year was out, I was doing my first game design. So,
which was
Scared Stiffs, a Ghostbusters adventure.
Nice.
John M. Ford, the novelist, wrote the adventure. Unfortunately, he didn't know how to write a game product, so it was a good short story that I had to turn into an actual game module.
So who did you work with at West End Games?
I was hired by Paul Murphy, who is the head of the editorial department. Greg Kostikian was lead designer and creative director. He taught me a ton of stuff.
I bet.
Eric Goldberg was the studio head at the time. Doug Kaufman was there. Steve Gilbert, Peter Corliss, artists, Steve Crane. I can't remember everybody, but it was a really good crew, and it was a studio that, in addition to doing design and edit, they actually had a development stage. So that's how I learned how to do all aspects of creating a game.
Some of our listeners might be curious. You say a developer, so what is that product? Well, let's not go too far down the rabbit hole, but an overview for people who might not know of a good development process for an RPG product.
A lot of play testing. It's a lot of number balancing. You make dice tables and you make sure that all the numbers are falling where you want them to fall. And it's really iterating to make sure that the game is doing everything you want it to do from a mechanical standpoint. Development of the other aspect of the role-playing game is story development, and then you just look for things to make sure the plot is hanging together. There's no loose ends. You're giving the game master everything they need to run the adventure or play the game, depending on the product.
Right. Now, you also met Ed Stark, right, at West End? Is that right?
A little later. So, as I said, I started as an editor, quickly became an editor and designer. Right after we launched the Star Wars game, I became creative director of West End, and I started to run the whole kit and caboodle. When we moved out to Honesdale, which was in Pennsylvania, because the owner, Scott Poulter, also had a shoe company. And he wanted to put everything in one place, his shoe company and his game company.
Sure.
In a place where he could afford to do that. And that was the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. He built a building. We were on the second floor. The shoe company was on the first floor. And we had a great big warehouse in the back for all the product.
Right.
While I was there, running the show, eventually I had to replace staff. Ed came to answer an ad. I really liked him. I wanted to hire him, but he was still in school and I needed somebody immediately. So I put a big check on his resume and said, hey, give me a holler when you finish your degree and let's talk again. But at that point I had left West End, but his resume was at the top. So the guy who took my place pulled it out, called Ed, hired him. And I was still living in Honesdale and we got to know each other and we've been friends ever since.
Yeah, well, as you know, he was just on our show, and he spoke very fondly of you and his time with you and his time at West End Games, and his story now checks out, right? So.
Yes. The funny thing is, I was no longer working there, but they were giving me freelance, and since I was still in town and they were all new, the staff would come over to ask me questions, and so I was like training these guys. Slightly, but kicking them off and getting their careers going. So, it's nice to look back and remember that right. I helped a few of them get going, and at least Ed is still working in the industry.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you worked with some great people there, and some of them have gone on to do some other things. Yeah. All right, so let's take us up to how you transitioned into TSR.
So like I said, after being at West End, I went freelance for a couple of years. Most of my work as a freelancer was for TSR. I also did a book for Lucasfilm during that period called A Guide to the Star Wars Universe, which was a big, thick encyclopedia of all the characters and things in the Star Wars universe, which they wanted to give to other writers to use. So it was before we had databases like the Wikipedia. We had my book. But about halfway through that process of being a freelancer, TSR said, hey, come on out for an interview. We're hiring. And I went out there and I interviewed with all the creative directors, the CDs as we called them.
And what year was this?
This would have been 91.
Okay, so well into the second edition era, kind of at the midpoint between second edition and third edition.
Yeah, actually, they launched second edition while I was at West End Games.
Yeah.
We had just released the Star Wars books, which had signatures, which is chunks of the book were in full color.
Yes.
It was the first time that a game had done that, and TSR.
I remember it well. It was amazing. It was like, holy cow! Like how they afford to do it.
I don't know, but we did it. But TSR was mad at us. I remember Jim Ward at Gen Con yelling at Curtis Smith, who was my boss there at the time, and saying, "It's your fault. We have to do these new books in full color." I said, "Oh, sorry." So that's how second edition got to be in full color, at least as I understand it. So then, 91, they brought me out there. All the CDs had worked with me as a freelancer. They wanted to hire me. I went in to see Jim Ward, who is the head of this company or the studio creative head at the time. And Jim and I did not have the same approach to things. And he basically said, yeah, you're not a hobbit, so we're not going to hire you right now. And I said, okay.
What do you mean by a hobbit?
Jim liked to discover new talent, and I was a jaded, experienced game designer. So I went back to freelancing, and then the following August, which would have been 92, Tim Brown called me, who is now in Jim's spot. Jim had been moved on to special projects. And Tim said, hey, if you're still interested in that job from last year, I want to hire you. And I said, oh, do I have to come back out for another interview? He said, no, I want to hire you. I said, okay, great. I'm working on the Star Wars book. Can I finish that first? How long do you need? give me till December and I'll come out in January. And so January of 93, I raced out from Honesdale to Lake Geneva so I could get there in time to watch the premiere of Deep Space Nine, which was starting that night. And I wanted to be in the hotel to watch it on January 2nd, I guess that was 1993.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
So anyway, now I'm in.
1993 was a big year for me too. That was the year we launched Magic the Gathering.
I know.
Yeah.
I was nearby watching.
I was in December in December of 92, so just a couple of weeks, maybe even just a week before you went out to TSR. I was in Jesper's basement during a Christmas party, looking at the very first Magic the Gathering art that came in.
Cool.
There were several excellent, memorable pieces from Anson Maddox and Mark Dean. Oh, it was great. It was magical. You can remember it.
Did you know what you had when you had it?
Oh, we knew it was good. I mean, it was like, wow, this is great. We're thinking like this might be as big as Vampire the Masquerade, or something. And I remember Mark Reinhagen telling me, oh my God, this is going to be way bigger. You guys are going to be so big. You're going to be so much bigger than we are. And I'm like, that's not what I'm looking for, but thank you. But yeah, we knew that we had a great idea, but we had no idea it was going to be so transformative for us and for so many people. So yeah. Okay, so you came out, Tim Brown hired you to do what? What did he give you? What did he put on your desk when you got there? Did you have a desk? Did you have an office? Did you have minions?
I didn't have minions. I was hired as a designer editor, so that meant they were going to give me both things to work on. They had no room in Cubicle Land, which is where all the designers were at the time. So I was given, they called it the French Quarter. It was all the way at the back where the magazines were, where Dungeon and Dragon were.
Yeah.
And there was this row of offices that were all empty, except for Harold Johnson had a corner. That's where they had Harold out. And they gave me one of those offices, which was nice to start out in.
Right.
I was away from everybody, but that suited me fine since I had, like I said, they were going to give me lots of things to immediately work on. I mean, I worked on the worlds. It's Dark Sun, Ravenloft, Planescape. One of the first things that...
Oh, boy, you just listed off like 3 amazing settings right in a row. You worked on all 3 of those?
In some capacity, yeah.
Yeah,
I started on both of Dark Sun and Ravenloft as a freelancer. I did Slave Tribes, which was the first supplement for Dark Sun. And I did Arcane Shadows, which was the 3rd adventure for Dark Sun. So I was in Dark Sun pretty early on. Ravenloft, I did Night of the Walking Dead as a freelancer. And then later on, I worked with, I did the development and co-design of some of Shane Hensley's products, Nightmare Lands, and for Dark Sun, City by the Silt Sea, the big box sets.
So for these great Dungeons and Dragons campaign settings that you worked on, how did you change your frame of mind when you would go from, can you describe, I don't know if this is a good question or not, it might be a great or it might be horrible, but like, is there like a certain frame of mind that you can explain that you would go to when working on, say, Dark Sun versus Ravenloft versus Planescape?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I always do, because I've worked on a lot of different IPs and various, from science fiction to fantasy and everything in the middle. I do some research first. I get a feel for the world, I read up on it, and I put myself in that mind frame by absorbing. With Dark Sun, it was really great because they sent me all of the great Brahm art.
Well, yeah.
So that really helped. With Star Wars, I'd watched the movies. With Ravenloft, I'm a big Stephen King fan, so I just get into the horror mindset. I really don't have a trouble switching like that, which I guess is why I got to work on all those things, which is nice. Yeah, one of the first things that I worked on when I got to the office, though, they used to have this process where you would throw your name in a hat for the next year's products, and then you saw if you got what you asked for. And I wanted to work on a box set called the Council of Worms, which was how to play dragons, a campaign where you got to play the dragon. And I did get that, and that was one of the first products I actually worked on when I got to the TSR offices.
Oh wow. Okay. So I gotta admit, I'm not familiar with that one. It sounds really pretty cool. What do you? I mean, do you start off as hatchlings, and then instead of going up levels, you go up ages?
Yes, you do. That's how I wrote it. And you got to play a dragon and his, I forget what I called it, but basically a humanoid companion to the dragon, so that you had both the dragon and a humanoid character to switch back and forth from. And it was its own area. It was a place called, I forget what we called it, the IO Isles, something like that. This was a long time ago, Peter. But it was a nice box set with beautiful art and great, we used to do those great box sets that probably lost us money every time we printed one, but they were beautiful.
Yeah, they were indeed. Yeah, one of the first things we cut.
I know.
Okay, so let's see. Anything that you want to talk about kind of during that time at TSR before I stuck my foot in the middle of it?
Yeah, so right before the dark times, we didn't know that was coming, at least on the creative level. I began pitching a new product for the company. And to do the pitch, we rented the movie theater in Lake Geneva. And I put together a slideshow, because this was before PowerPoint, where I actually made slides and put them in a tray.
Right. Had to make sure they're in the right order and they're facing the right direction.
Right. Yep. And I did a soundtrack, and I pitched a product line that at the time I was calling Futures. And it was basically science fiction the way D&D was done for fantasy. So, a system that would have a game master's guide and a player's guide and campaign settings. Figured that was the model that we knew. So I was trying to work toward what upper management understood.
Right.
Lorraine Williams saw the pitch. She was the owner of the company at the time.
Yeah.
And she gave the go-ahead to start working on the game, but she wanted a new name because all of the marketing people thought futures meant the stock market.
Stock market.
I, of course, had no connection to the stock market at the time, and it never even crossed my mind that that's what that meant. Because my tagline was, "What future do you want to play?" And they liked that tagline, but they didn't like the name. So we went round and round, and eventually we came up with a made-up word, which was Alternity.
Yep.
Rich Baker was assigned to be my co-designer. I was the lead designer. And we were working on that when the bad stuff started to happen, which was good for our team because we actually had something to do that was new and exciting while everybody else was not sure what was going on.
And just to fill in, if anybody watching this not quite sure what the bad stuff is,
yeah, sure.
Bill's referring to the financial difficulties that TSR encountered, starting I think in late '96 when a lot of product was returned from the book trade that year, and a host of we won't go into it. We've covered it quite a bit in a couple other shows, but basically the time period where TSR basically went bankrupt, although not formally, and gave me the opportunity to buy a new toy.
Yeah, this would have been from November or December. I guess it was November of '96. We stopped publishing.
Yeah.
And we didn't pick it back up again until we were out in Seattle in August of the
August,
following year.
August 97. Yep.
Yeah. But during that time, we did have a round of layoffs at Christmas. That was a weird moment. I got a phone call on my desk, which was unusual because my phone on my desk never rang.
Probably jump. What's that?
And it was Lorraine, who never called me. And she said, "Bill, will you come to the conference room?" And I'm like, "Okay." And I'm like, "Uh-oh, what's going on?"
It's a good thing I was at my desk.
I guess. So I go to the conference room, and there's about a dozen other people in the room. And Lorraine basically told us, "We're about to lay some people off. You're all safe." It was kind of like they put the blood over our door, and the angel of death passed us over as, unfortunately, the conference room looked out on the parking lot. So we got to see all the people walking to their cars with their boxes of stuff. But she did, she did save who she could and protected those of us that she deemed valuable.
Yep.
Like I said, I continued to work with my team on Alternity. We were going to have that ready to publish when we were going to publish again, come hell or high water. And at the same time, so when I got to TSR, I met Michelle Carter, who was an editor already at TSR when I got there. And we got to know each other. She played in my Star Wars game, and we were going to get married. And of course, this was all happening as the company was sinking. We had our wedding planned for May of '97. I guess it was in April that we finally heard that you were interested in purchasing TSR. We went ahead and had our wedding.
I'm glad I didn't, screw that up.
No. It was just a weird time from our end of it, Peter. Went on our honeymoon. I got back. I guess that was the first week in June, and got a call that said, "You should come to the office today," because I wasn't supposed to be back for another couple of days. "You should come to the office today. We're going to hear something." So I went to the office, and you were there, and we had the big meeting where you announced that you and Lorraine had reached an agreement, and TSR was going to be saved.
Yeah, but that was the meeting where I sang the company song, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the best days of my life to have had that opportunity. That's yeah.
So we were just happy that that D&D was going to get to go on, and we were even more thrilled when you decided to bring a bunch of us with it.
Yeah,
which we appreciated.
Yeah, well, it was great. It was my pleasure, my honor. I mean, it's what a great company, what a great product, and D&D, what a great legend, and thankfully we made that transition. And even though it wasn't a perfect ending for everybody, and these things never are, I think in terms of the history of corporate acquisitions, I think it was one of the better ones. And everybody, I think, was pretty happy with how it turned out on average. Yeah. So you were working on Alternity. So so who did you get to work with at TSR the most? I mean, like who do you have the fondest memories of? I shouldn't say fondest, and that's complicated. What strikes you as some of the people that you really enjoyed working with at TSR before the acquisition?
Well, it was amazing meeting Zeb Cook and Jeff Grubb the first time, because they were legendary names on the original books that I got to play with when I was much younger. And to see that they were real people and cool people, and as much a game nerd as I was, so that was pretty neat. Um, I worked a lot with Rich Baker on the Dark Sun stuff, and then later on Alternity. Tim Brown was our leader for a good chunk of that period before he moved on. Lester Smith and I did a bunch of stuff together.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Dragon Dice and some other stuff that we worked on together. I mean, it was an amazing group of people. Colin McComb, who's now doing computer games. It was actually, the staff was fairly huge when I got there, and we brought a good chunk of them with us to Seattle, at least for a little while, before we started. Monty Cook, Skip Williams.
Yeah.
Skip was already there. Monty came a little later.
Yeah, Monty. Well, I had him on my show, and you asked earlier some of the shows that really stood out, and Monty was definitely one of them. He's a great guy, great designer.
Steve Winter, Thomas Reed, Andrea Heyday. I could keep going, but there's if you opened the book and saw their names, they were in the building with me.
It was such a great group of people. It's really good people. All right, well, okay, so then I step in it. You come out to Seattle, and tell us what that was like, or kind of like how you landed in Seattle. What were you assigned to do once you got there, that sort of thing?
Well, first it started with, I remember one of our first conversations, because you were trying to meet with all the staff at the time, and this is while we were still in Lake Geneva. And I was nervous about saying anything, but I finally said, hey, I've been doing the creative director for Alternity for 7 months without any additional compensation, just so you know. And you immediately gave me a raise, which was nice of you.
Oh, phew, I never know how these stories are going to turn out. Good.
And you brought a bunch of us out there to let us look around. You wined and dined us. At least the people I think you were really trying to make sure would come with you to Seattle. Yeah. I mean, we liked what we saw. I think one of the first places you guys took us was the new game center.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
I remember you beating us terribly in BattleTech pods, and because you were really good at that, and we had never played it before, but that's okay. And eventually all the arrangements were made. We did our last Gen Con, which we didn't know we were going to actually throw that year, but
now that I remember well, because the first the Gen Con in '97. Yep. By the way, extra points for mentioning Gen Con. That's always extra points on on this channel.
But that's one of the things I was tasked with doing, because we were going to premiere Alternity at Gen Con '97.
In '97. Oh,
yeah.
But yeah, you didn't get a chance to do that though.
Oh, we did. You let us print the limited edition. We did a limited edition black cover book that Rich and I hand signed all the copies.
Well, I know we did that, but we did that for the first Gen Con. I mean, that was only like 2 months after the deal was done.
I was all ready to go, and you said yes.
You were like lined up, ears pinned back.
Yeah, we got that book out for Gen Con, and it was still wet when we got it from the printer. I mean, we did a finished version of it the following year, but we did the limited edition, and we had demos at Gen Con, and we were doing that while we were packing.
Yeah.
Just right after Gen Con, we drove to Seattle.
Wow. I gotta pause. That Gen Con was so memorable for me, because we had it was a disaster in terms of there was a lot of stuff prepared that you guys were able to do internally, but externally, like there wasn't a decorator contract in place, and there weren't hotel contracts in place, and there was just a lot of things that are longer lead time items that TSR hadn't been able to do, and so it was crazy getting that together. But my favorite part was that we did the block party.
Yep.
We asked the city of Milwaukee to close down the street out in front of the Mecca Center and say, we just want to make a big statement. What do we do? Let's just close down the street and throw a big party out in the front of the convention center. And it was great. I love Indianapolis. That's one thing that Indianapolis has never let us do. We have the Georgia Street, but it's not quite the same. You want to close down the main street. You want to close down the main drag that everybody has to come down and But anyway, it was good times.
Yeah, and we threw that. We got it off the ground. Like I said, we got the limited edition out the door, and then we made the trip. You set us up in near the front of the one building, which was close to where your desk was.
Yeah,
that's where we got to set up.
That's shop. Like keep an eye on you guys.
Hey, that's fine. I was one of the creative directors. My first real memory once we got out there was you put a committee together to figure out who was going to run the show for TSR. And I was one of the committee members. And we interviewed, I want to say 112 people, but it wasn't quite that many. And the committee included you, me, Scaff, Elias, Harold Johnson, Fink, and Sue.
I was trying to remember who else was on this committee because I knew that this story was going to come up.
And Sue was on the committee too. Sue Wineland, Sue Cook at the time, now Sue Wineland.
Oh, she's my guest next week.
And like I said, we interviewed everybody and their brother and sister. And we weren't getting anywhere. We didn't like anybody. I mean, we liked them, but we didn't like them.
Yeah. Let me restate that. We liked a lot of people, just not for that job, right?
Right. Yeah. And I'm at home, and the phone rings, and I said, whenever the phone rings, something weird happens. Like I answer the phone, and it's Peter, who's never called me before either. So I said, "Hi." He goes, "You're off the committee." I said, "Oh no, I've been fired already. I've only been here for a week and a half." He goes, "We're going to interview you tomorrow." I said, "For what?" "For the position." "Can I think about it?" "Yeah, tell me like in an hour. Go talk to Michelle and let me know." So I came in the next day. You guys interviewed me, and you made me whatever I was, director of TSR for eventually.
I remember, I don't know what the name of the title was, but we made you in charge of all the writing and game design for TSR products for us at Wizards, right? I mean, the way we were organized, the art and stuff was separate, and the brand management was separate, and that went to Ryan Dancy.
That's a little later. I actually did the brand for a little while.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but I probably told you weren't going to have that job very long.
No, and I didn't actually want that job for very long. But I had it for a little while with Todd Bazakis.
Oh, yeah.
Who was my financial guy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, good guy. He wasn't sure about all this gaming stuff, but he was a good guy.
Yeah, he helped me a lot. So,
I think he's working in futures now, by the way.
Yeah, as well he should.
Well, and I think I also told you, you got to run the whole TSR group, but the most important project of all, I'm going to run it myself.
And, hey, that's fine.
Yeah.
Luckily, we also decided to go after Star Wars at the same time, so that kept me busy while you did the D&D stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it was, it's just the way it was,
I will say you probably, if you remember this, it's probably not fondly, but after you gave me the position, you invited me and my wife out to dinner, and I got terrible directions, and we got lost, and it took us like an hour and a half to get to the dinner. We were so late, and the place that you had it didn't have a sign. It was a hidden door. So not only did I miss the exit, I then couldn't find the building. And I'm like, oh, he's really gonna think I am a terrible person. But we finally got there, and we had a nice dinner, even though it was like almost midnight at the time.
I know the place. It was at the ruins. Yeah.
So,
That's a great spot. That's one of my favorite places. It's a membership pod. I dropped my membership a couple of years ago. Actually, I dropped it twice. I went through a period where I didn't have much money, and I dropped it. And then Gen Con started doing well. I got back in there, and then, but it was like they charge you every quarter whether you ate there or not. After a while, it was like, oh God, another quarter went by, and we didn't go to dinner at the ruins. Okay, let's not be a member of this place anymore. But that is my favorite place to eat in Seattle.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that, and
I
learned that Seattle was not as big as New York. It only had 2 exits, and I missed it because it was on the left, not the right. And yeah, anyway.
But it's I don't remember you being late. I don't remember the bad stuff. I remember the good stuff.
That's nice of you. I remember because it mortified me. So.
Oh well, I understand that for sure. It would have mortified me to be in because I'm always get mortified when I'm late. So what what from that era should we talk about? We actually don't have too much time left. What was the challenge of, like, you were promoted into that group? And by the way, Scap was a big fan of yours. Scap, and I remember Scap. I don't remember who else was on the committee. I don't remember anything Harold said, but I remember Scap and I used to talk for hours about filling that role, because it was a really important role that we wanted to get to do a good job. And yeah, we interviewed a lot of people, but we really wanted to get somebody we had a lot of faith in. And then I remember working with you on the committee with Scap, and Scap and I were just talking one night. It was like, Scap, like, why don't we just hire Bill to do it? I mean, like, it's just like, what? I mean, I don't know why we picked you to be on the committee instead of asking you to be interviewed even. I don't know. Who knows how these things work out, right? But
I never really go into a thing looking to be in charge, but somehow I always wound up there.
Yeah, it probably has its roots in being a game master. All right, so yeah, so what was the challenge of running that group? Because you didn't come in being in a position of authority within that circle. There were people in that group that had a lot more experience, not a management experience, because I think that's really what sold us on wanting you to do that job. But certainly there were people that had a lot more experience with D&D, Skip Williams, Steve Winter, Harold Johnson, a bunch of people. There was a number of people in that group that are big names in the history of this game, Was it hard to suddenly be their boss?
Yes and no. There were challenges. Everyone had a different idea about what TSR actually meant. They all had, we had like 9 lines at the time, and everybody had their favorite, and they didn't want to kill it or hurt it or do anything bad to it. And I knew we were going to have to, so that was part of, part of the thing I had to get ready to deal with. There was also making sure that we transitioned into this new group. The magic designer team was very different than our team. Came from 2 different schools of thought. Yep. The magic side was much more entrepreneurial, and debate was the way to get to the solution. And the TSR side, mostly everybody worked on their own thing by themselves till it was done, and then other people contributed. So making those 2 mesh, it took years, but that was one of the early issues. But most people, even though they made me a creative director for the Alternity line at the very end, and I did get that done. I think people saw that, and people respected me. People liked what I did. So I didn't lord over them. I just said, hey, how do I help you guys do this? And it worked out.
I was trying to remember, did we move any of the WotC R&D people in under you at any time?
I had the Magic Writers for a while, Scott McGow.
Okay.
And there was he had another person working with him. I don't remember who it was. I had Selinker, Nudover, Tailwind for a while. So yeah, we Jonathan, of course, Jonathan Tweet. So we had some mingling, and later on we would move. As time went on, we would give some people to the Magic side for some cross training.
Yeah,
but that was a little later.
Any interaction, any stories involving some of the legendary Magic guys like Richard Garfield or Bill Rose, Scapelius, any of those guys?
They were all giants in the area. Richard was always very quiet and polite, but he would come by every once in a while and throw an idea at me or ask me a question, and then he'd go back off.
He would. That's great.
And later when he was doing the Star Wars dice game and the baseball game, we would talk about a little of things every once in a while, because I would do a play test with him and I'd throw out something, and I guess he thought that was interesting, and he'd come back and ask me some questions.
Well, I just think the world of Richard. Every time I've ever had a chance to just have the simplest of conversations with him, it's just, great.
And later, of course, we were all under Bill Rose. I worked directly for Bill for, I guess, most of my period as R&D director. I did that for 14 years at the end of the day, longest in the history of the game. So,
wow, you were there. You were at WotC for 14 years.
I was director of R&D for 14 years. Yeah, 97 to 2011.
Oh my God, you were at WotC longer than I was. Oh, wow. Yeah, so you were there. You stayed there for a whole decade after.
Yeah,
you were an old timer.
I put the lights out on second edition. I helped launch third edition. I got us through 3.5. I launched fourth edition, and I was there at the very beginning of what would become fifth edition. Well,
there you go. So anything you want to say? So we have just a couple minutes. Anything you want to say about though? Well, I've never had anybody say anything about fourth edition on this show. Good.
I'm proud of fourth edition. It wasn't everybody's cup of tea. It was a design that I was forced to do, but I did the best I could with it.
Fair enough.
And a lot of what is in fourth edition is now hidden in fifth edition, but slightly differently. One of the proudest things of fourth edition that I liked was the minion rules, monsters with 1 hit point that you could throw a whole bunch of them on the table and plow through them, as opposed to the 100 hit point monsters. So
right. That's pretty cool. All right. Well, well, we're running towards the end. We got about 10 minutes left. What was the last thing you worked on there before you left? You worked on fifth edition a little bit. What?
Yeah, we were just beginning the explorations of what that could look like when I was still there. The last thing I actually worked on was I launched the board game line that we did. We kicked it off with Castle Ravenloft, which I co-designed with Mike Merles and Peter Lee. And we did a whole series of those. And I gave the go ahead for the Lords of Waterdeep game, which I think is one of the better games we've ever done.
That might be, wow. Would it be fair? I'm trying to think if this is fair. It might be the best, the most accessible board game of WotC. I mean, is there any I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, if you think about, like, if you go to a convention and find people playing a WotC board game, what are they playing? It's probably Lords of Waterdeep. Maybe, you know, if they're old grognards, might be playing, you know, Robo Rally, like me. Like
Yeah,
I mean,
Lords of Waterdeep did really well, as far as I know. I mean, it came out. I got it going, but it came out after I had left, I believe. And I know the adventure system games, which basically let you play D&D without a game master, have done fairly well too.
Right.
Castle Ravenloft, Wrath of Asardalon.
Yeah. Yeah, those two, sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in all my time there, in addition to, you know, steering the ship, as it were, and helping get all that product out, you know, we expanded under my watch. We did the miniatures, the painted miniatures. We did, you know, I helped with the novels later on. The board games, we added all the D20 games. We got the Star Wars license. So I did Pokemon Junior, one of our most successful products ever, until we printed too many of them. So yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Fond memories.
Fond memories. So what are you doing now, or what have you done since then? How do you want to cover the next, let's say, 9 years post WotC? You know.
So I left Wizards and trying to figure out what I was going to do next. I ran into Zeb Cook at GDC Austin.
Zeb Cook, famous for designing second edition D&D, right?
Yep. Oriental Adventures
and many other things.
Planescape. Zeb said, "Hey, come work for me at ZeniMax Online Studios. Make the jump to computer games." So I said, "Okay, sure." Moved out to Baltimore. Worked on as a writer for the game. It means I'm doing a lot of dialogue because we're a fully voiced game. A couple of years ago, I was the primary writer for most of the game, and then I became the lead writer. Now I run the writing team, and help craft the stories. And we got more players today than we did at launch, and we're just going like gangbusters. Elder Scrolls Online is the name of the game. It's multiplayer, but you can play it like a single player if you're a single player fan. So, and it's very story oriented, as opposed to a lot of MMOs, which are fetch games. We're not a fetch game.
No, I mean, great job for you, and obviously everybody. Lots of people worked on it, but I think it's a great MMO and fabulous. Hey, not to take it back to WotC TSR, but we have a question from chat from Alpha Stream 1. Question: what were the most profitable lines during your TSR WotC time? Were licensed lines like Star Wars hard to make profitable, and were boxed sets as bad profit-wise as everyone says? The last one, I can say yes. I mean, well, it comes down to price point, right? I know that they were as published by TSR, and I'm not sure we ever did any box sets at WotC/TSR.
We did a couple of introductory sets that were in boxes, but they weren't packed full of stuff. They were They were done on the cheap to make them introductory.
And generally, with introductory products, you price them cheap for acquisition anyway.
Right.
You know,
yeah, I mean, right from the beginning with the launch of third edition, you know, we were head and shoulders above where we had been. And for us, the core books were always the highest selling product, whether that was the Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, and Dungeon Master's Guide, but also things like some of the campaign setting books, and obviously what we call the splat books for third edition. all the feat books. Those did pretty well, which is why we did so many, why we kept doing them. Profitable for licensing is always tough because the license wants to take a cut. Yeah, Star Wars, we did well with it, especially when we added the miniatures, because we could sell so many of those. But role-playing, until recently, we just didn't have the numbers of players to make the really big bucks. I think 5th edition is hit at the confluence of the right time, where the technology, which is a lot of the technology we tried to do for 4th edition that we couldn't get off the ground, is now commonplace for, like this. It's easier to teach a role-playing game by showing you how to play than by giving you a book. So so that's really helping. And of course, a lot of the people that are now in positions of power in various media grew up playing the game, and now they want to bring it to the world. So that's that's great.
It's so fantastic that D&D has become so close, so much closer to pop culture. It's really good. Hey, I want to. We are like almost done. I got a question for you. I want to ask all my guests. So when you look back over the time especially with D&D, TSR, WotC, what have you taken with you from that time? Like, what do you treasure from those days, those memories?
Well, first, I want to, this goes back to you and the committee. I want to thank them for trusting me with the stewardship of D&D for what turned out to be 14 years. That was, I feel honored and humbled to have been able to be in that position for so long, and to help steer the product line that I loved, or the property that I loved, and still do love. I still play.
Me
every
too.
week. I'm proud of what we've accomplished over the years. I think we've put together a great legacy of products that, no matter what edition, they're still there, and they're there for people to take inspiration from. And
yes,
they're still up on my shelf, and they will be forever. And the type of products we make, some of the best friendships I've got were with people I've worked with on these games. And just an amazing amount of talent that taught me, and then later I got to teach the next generation. And I'm continuing to do that in my role now as lead writer. And it's just, it's something I take. I try to take the real responsibility with that.
Yeah. Alpha Stream added, and I want to underscore it. Thanks to Bill for so many cool products during his time. Thank you, Bill, for doing so many great products during your time, and being at the helm of D&D for 14 years. It's funny because I mentioned 4th edition because I've been a bit critical of 4th edition, but I'm sure that's no surprise. When you put your heart and soul in one edition, I think it's inevitable that whoever does that the next edition is like, oh no. But it was really a pleasure to work with you those years ago, and I'm glad that we were sober enough in those committee meetings that we made the right choice. And so thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
All right. Yeah. All right. So that wraps up another episode of Fireside with Peter Adkison. Thank you for being with us. Our guest next week will be Sue Wineland, who was mentioned in this episode. So how's that for a nice transition?
Tell Sue I said hello.
Okay, we'll tell Sue. Bill says hello. All right, we'll do that. That'll be next week. In the meantime, on Friday, at 2 p.m. we have table takes, and at 2:30 we have the roundtable discussions. And on Monday we will have board games with the Murph at 6 p.m. These are all times in Pacific Standard Time. Wednesday next week at 1:30 will be board games with This Game Gets Dicey, and then at 4 o'clock on Wednesday, back to me. with our guest will be Sue Wineland. We have all of our episodes are up on YouTube the day after they come out. We also have podcast versions coming out. Most of the Magic the Gathering first 2 seasons of this show are all now available on podcast. So please remember, if you like our show, follow, subscribe, turn on notifications, tell everybody about it, and go check out our old shows. And so thanks once again to our guest, Bill Slavicsek, our studio manager, Marcus Mays, our streaming manager, Lauren Bond, our producer, Derek Guter, and to Gen Con TV for being our host. But thanks most of all to you for watching. Thank you.